Bung Pod. Welcome back, Wine Wonder Boy.
And we got Jazzy J. Jazzy!
What is a bung?
The hole of the barrel is called a bung hole. Which inside the bung hole is called a bung. Wine with mayhem. That's what it's about. I think my parents don't ever try and use that. That'd be so funny if they tried to use.
I want to hear your mom use
slang.
that. Yeah. Ian, you've got drip.
You've got drip, Ian. Yeah. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Bung Pod. It's your boy Ian King, aka Wine Wonder Boy. Jazzy is not here today, but we got an awesome special guest here. He is a winemaker. He is one of my good friends. He is the co-owner of Cairdeas Winery. Please welcome Charlie Lybecker.
What's up, everybody?
Sorry, there we go. It's a lot more exciting when we introduce people and Jazz is here because she goes like, woo, and does a crazy laugh.
I mean, if it was recorded with like a live studio audience with like, you know, all the cheering in the background, it'd be great. But it's a closed audience tonight.
Yeah.
Private session
Private
filming.
sesh right now.
Yeah.
So we are here in the Cairdeas barn in Manson, Washington. So this is your production facility. This is your main tasting room. And then you guys also have another tasting room that you opened up last year?
Yeah. So brief history of the winery is my wife Lacey and I started the winery in West Seattle back in 2009, and we made wine in the city for a couple years. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we were really trying to flesh out like what the brand was actually going to be and where we wanted the actual winery to be. Because as you know, like when you're starting a winery from scratch, the first couple of years are really just producing wine, and you're 3 years into it before you actually like have a bottled wine and you're ready to sell. So we had our day jobs. We were doing like the regular daily hustle while making wine like on the weekends and kind of on the side, and trying to figure out where we wanted to land. And my wife, she had a job in the hospitality industry and was hired to help open a resort here in Lake Chelan. And she came and was doing some marketing stuff for them, and came home one day all excited about there being wine here in the valley. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, babe, that sounds cool. Like, I want to tag along next time you go. Yeah. And so we came out with a couple of our friends, and we spent the weekend wine tasting here in Chelan. And at the end of the day, we went and grabbed some food at the market next door, and we were grilling on the deck of our condo that we were staying at. We opened a couple bottles of wine that we had bought that day, and we're staring at this gorgeous lake across the street with the Cascade Mountains in the background. And we're like, that's it. And so we knew from that time on that Lake Chelan was going to be our forever home. Yeah. And so we moved the winery here permanently in 2012, and we've been here ever since. And
so you were looking more of like, where do we want to live? Because wherever we are in Washington State, I can always get grapes somewhere.
Yeah, so I mean, we were really new into the wine business, obviously. And we were trying to figure out not only where do we want to live, but where makes the most sense to start our brand. Yeah. And the Lake Chelan AVA was established in 2009, so the same year that we became a winery. And at the time, I think there were 15 wineries in the valley. And so when we moved here, we were winery like number 18. Yeah. Now there's over 40 in the valley. But at the same time, like if we were to move to Yakima or Walla Walla, we would have been like winery like number 100 or something like that. Yeah. So like Lake Chelan was such a small region at the time that it felt like maybe an easier entry point. And it was so new to getting its AVA status that we felt like we could be a part of it kind of from the ground up. And so that was a really big appeal to us, is we love the Lake Chelan Valley, and we got to kind of be a part of it from the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, that's epic. That's crazy that there's so many wineries that jumped, like the numbers jumped up drastically after you guys got here.
Yeah, it's interesting, like having paid a lot of attention to what's happening in the wine business. The earliest wineries in Washington State popped up in like the late 70s, early 80s. But it wasn't until like the mid 90s where there was a big like volume boom in the wine business. And that's when a ton of like the Woodinville guys started popping up, was like the mid to late 90s.
Okay.
And like early 2000s was really big for wine in Washington. And then we went through like this little lull for about 10 years. And then 2009 through 2015, I want to say, there was another kind of boom, and that was the era that we were a part of. And then there was another lull for a little bit, and then it kind of like we went through this wave again where there was another big increase. And so it's been really fun to watch, seeing all the wineries that popped up. When we became a winery in 2009, we were Washington Winery, like number like I want to say 458. I'm just going to pull a number out of the air.
Yeah.
But it was like in the mid 400s.
Okay.
There's over 1,000 wineries in Washington today. So from when we started in 2009, it has more than doubled. The amount of wineries in Washington has more than doubled.
That's
so like there was
wild.
an insane boom from 2009 until now. I mean, from 1980 until 2009, there were only 400.
Yeah.
And from 2009 to now, there's over 1,000. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's an insane growth curve.
Yeah, that's crazy. And it was also wild to me when I was going through my programs for wine education that Washington was number one on volume as far as production. It was Washington, and then it was like, I think Central Valley, California. That was like just behind Washington on pure just volume.
Yeah, I mean, Chateau Ste. Michelle is obviously like the biggest driver of wine in Washington State. They're still in the top 50 wine brands in the country. And we have several Washington wineries that make that top 50 list, but obviously a gigantic chunk of the top brands in the country are California based.
Yeah.
But we do have, I want to say, 3 or 4 different Washington brands that hit that list. St. Michelle, Precept, House of Smith.
Right.
And I believe there's another one that I just am not like touching on right now, but yeah, we do have some big wineries in Washington, but Washington State is really known for its small and kind of more boutique style producers, which I super appreciate.
Yeah,
they're
I
not
prefer.
wines that you are going to see like on a grocery store shelf all over the place. You almost have to be like a fan of the winery and be in their wine club to have access to their wines, which means that you're not going to find them everywhere, which might be a negative. But at the same time, like they're almost those like harder to get, more niche kind of style wines.
There's
And
like
so,
an exclusivity kind of factor to that.
yeah, and I mean at the same time, like it's because they're making wine on a scale where they're able to do more experimentation and create like really interesting things that you're not seeing large scale wine producers do.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of fun things to be had out there.
So where did you get your wine knowledge from? Like how you made wine? I know you went to, where'd you go for? You went somewhere for winemaking?
Yeah, so I went through a winemaking program in Seattle called the Northwest Wine Academy. It's the only winemaking school on the west side, I believe. At least it was at the time.
Yeah.
There are several great wine programs here in Washington State. Walla Walla has a great one. Yakima has a great one. WSU has a great one. The one I went through happened to be like a whole 5 minutes up the road from my house. It was
That's solid.
mega convenient. And my winemaking school was a hands-on winemaking school too. It wasn't like the online certificate program where you're getting a lot of book smarts. Like I actually was in the trenches, like, cleaning tanks and loading grapes into a press. And
I think winemaking is one of those
doing the dirty
special
work.
things where you have to be like hands-on to learn to the best of your ability.
But to answer your question, where did my winemaking knowledge come from?
Yeah.
It's a collection of being just super interested in wine, going through a winemaking program, doing an insane amount of just my own reading and research. Before I even got into winemaking school, I just went online and figured out what textbooks the students at UC Davis were going through with their program, and I ordered them on Amazon and just read through them myself.
Nice. That's cool.
And then, of course, the best chunk of my wine knowledge is just experiencing wine and asking a lot of questions. So while we were still in Seattle, my wife's coworkers would organize these wine tasting tours in Woodinville on the weekends, and we would they'd rent a bus or whatever, and they'd take us on a wine tasting tour. And as we would stop at places, we'd be sitting at the bar, and I'd be just asking questions about the wines. And when I found out that the winemaker was there, I'd love to introduce myself and just start chatting, and they would get bored and move on, and I would find myself sitting at the bar tasting wines and just talking to a winemaker for an hour, 2 hours. And I'd have to call the group to be like, where are you guys? Where can I meet up? Because they're 2 or 3 more places on at this point. But it just kind of that curiosity led me down this rabbit hole of wanting to know more. I've always been a really curious person, and I want to know how things work and what makes wine tick. And I'm still trying to figure that out. With wine, it's the more you learn that you have to learn. And so I think if I stop learning, I haven't done it right, because it's you should always be striving to figure out what the next thing is. And that's one of the things we love to do at Cairdeas is, take the knowledge that we've built over the last 15 years of doing this, but then what can we do that's wild and crazy just to see what happens? And then what can you learn from that experiment, and how do you build upon it? And then do you turn that into something? And so we've created several wines around experiments that have just grown into becoming a part of our regular program, that become something really unique and interesting that a lot of other folks in Washington aren't doing. And I think that adds something that's kind of special about what we do.
All right, let's take a quick break for a second, because I got something I want to tell you guys about. If you want an extra episode per week, if you want exclusive discounts on some dope-ass merch that we got, also, if you want to add your 2 cents, your opinions, your hot takes, or your topic ideas, we want to hear about it. Go to patreon.com/officialbungpod and talk to us. Now let's get back to the show. All right, guys, we got some news. We have an official Bung Pod store. We got some merch going. bungpod.store. Update your life. Update your wardrobe. You need some new clothes. You need to look fresh. Update your life, update your style. We got hoodies, we got handbags, we got stickers, we got beanies, we got more coming on the way. So if you like the show and you want to cop yourself some merch, go to bungpod.store. Now let's get back to the show. Which wines are you pouring right now for?
Well, so the
wines you bring us?
the wines I have for you today, Ian, are kind of what I would consider our core wines. Chelan on Papa, which is my favorite wine that we make, modeled after my absolute favorite wine in the whole world, Chateauneuf de Pape. And then we have Try, which is kind of the flagship red wine that we make. It's the house favorite. It's our GSM. And then Consonance, which is our Petit Syrah and Syrah blend. So
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's taste a little bit, shall we?
You bet, man.
So you guys, I guess I didn't do this on the intro, but you are all Rhône, correct? So everything, all the grapes that you work with are all Rhône varieties?
Yeah, so we would say that we're Rhône-inspired, and
Rhône-inspired.
it is like 96% Rhône.
Yeah.
We fudge it a little bit. So, like, for instance, Petite Syrah that's in the consonants is not technically a Rhône variety, but it is from a direct neighboring AVA or, region in France. A lot of the grapes that we use are also grown in Languedoc. So
Right.
Petite Syrah is kind of like really well known in that Languedoc region. So we crossed the border a little bit in that one.
Yeah.
But it's close
Yeah.
enough to count
Yeah.
in our eyes.
Very big, inky, big in body, small in stature.
Petite.
Very petite in stature, but very inky, big, full-bodied red wine.
Yeah. So Petite Syrah
Sounds
can be a
great.
super aggressive grape, obviously. What I would say, though, about the Cairdeas house style is that we make wine that is more delicate, more elegant, more nuanced. And so even though Petite Syrah can be a really aggressive grape,
Yeah.
through our winemaking practices, picking, processing, aging, etc., it's still going to be a really elegant, balanced wine instead of a super aggressive, tannic, rip your face off wine.
Yeah. I've had it I've had a lot of ways. I've had it like super aggressive before, and then obviously, like you said, I've had it like where it's very silky, still full-bodied, but very silky and smooth. And I think that's what you kind of go for.
One of the things that I don't think people realize is that a lot of the elements that go into making a wine the way that it is, they're all winemaking decisions, right? Like, one of the things that we get a lot is, oh, you guys make a Viognier. Isn't Viognier sweet? I'm like, well, that's a winemaking decision.
Yeah.
Because yes, grape juice is sweet, but then you ferment it. And do you ferment all of the sugar out of it? That's a winemaking decision.
Right.
At Cairdeas, yes, we do. Every single wine we make is dry, perfectly dry. In fact, there's no residual sugar in any of the wines that we make. And so if you have a perception of sweetness, even in a grape like Riesling, that was a winemaking decision.
Right.
And over time, I think people build up this perception, oh, well, Rieslings are sweet because most producers leave some residual sugar. That's a choice.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it that way. And so at Cairdeas, as a fundamental, like, we are not sweet wine people. The joke I tell people is we're sweet enough personally. We don't need to have sugar in the wine, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, we make dry wines here at Cairdeas Winery, and sometimes people will taste, you know, pineapple or tropical flavors in a wine, and your brain tells you, okay, well, I'm tasting pineapple, so that's sweet.
Yeah.
Well, that's just a flavor that was created during fermentation, you know, and those esters that are created aren't necessarily tied to sweetness, and so even though you're smelling and you're tasting these tropical flavors,
Right.
There may not actually be any residual sweetness in the
Yeah.
wine. And so that's, again, it's a winemaking technique, and how do you ferment the wine and how do you coax those flavors out, you know, and it's done through fermentation vessels, fermentation temperatures, and all in an attempt to achieve stylistically what our goals are for each wine as we're making them.
Yeah, I've had so many people throughout the years of just my wine career, from like when I was in a tasting room, like so many customers coming in, like specifically for a rosé that we had, and they're like, "Oh, it's I don't like sweet wine, so I don't really want the rosé." Like, no, our rosé is bone dry, but it's high in acid and natural acidity, and it has flavors like strawberry, watermelon, white peach. That's like perceived sweetness. Like, so like when acid and big fruit flavors come in alignment together, your brain thinks is, oh, this is sweet, but it's not like syrupy sweet, you know. I think that's like one of the biggest hurdles, or one of the biggest knowledge gaps from consumer to seller at any point, is just the language of wine, because it is really scientific when it comes down to it, but how the consumer perceives it is, oh, this is sweet, where it's not actually chemically sweet. It's just, you know, like breaking down the brass tacks. The evidence tells you it's not, but your brain thinks it is, which is such like a weird thing. Or like sometimes vanilla off like an oak barrel for red wines. People are like, okay, this is a sweet wine. Like,
Right.
Kind of, but not really.
And one of the things that I always like to tell people is so important to understand the chemistry of a wine from the winemaking standpoint. I'm not saying from a consumer standpoint. From a winemaking standpoint, as a winemaker, it is so important to understand the chemistry of wine, because wine is a living thing. I mean, there are living organisms in this wine. Yeast, certain bacteria, whatever, and all of those things help make this wine what it is. But at the same time, like, you cannot base your winemaking solely on the chemistry, because those numbers tell you nothing about what that wine smells or tastes like.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, your own personal sensory evaluation of the vineyard, the grapes, the juice in the winery, the wine as it's aging, tells you kind of what you need to know. And so numbers are part of the story.
Yeah.
But then, like, the most important tools that we have in our entire production facility is our nose and our mouth.
So are you in the trenches? Like when like picking dates are going to come up soon, are you out there in the trenches in the vineyard, just like eating the grapes and seeing their flavor profile before you make a picking decision? Or
yeah, we try to make, as a team, a pass through all of our vineyard blocks early in the season, and a lot of that's just to get a visual on, you know, how kind of the late season of the growing part of it is going. What do canopies look like, especially after like a hot August kind of heat spell?
right.
How are the canopies holding up? And it gives my team a good sense of like, okay, this is kind of where we're at now. But then once the harvest starts, I'm the one that is making the laps, and I'm in every single one of our vineyard blocks at least once a week, sometimes twice or 3 times a week, depending on where I'm at. Because for us, we try to do as little intervention in the winery as possible, meaning if we nail our picking decision and we can bring the fruit into the winery and process it minimally and get a really good clean fermentation and get it into an aging vessel, there's really nothing else we have to do.
Yeah.
And so if we're treating those blocks and those grapes, and once they come into the winery, processing and aging wise, if we're treating that block, that fruit, those grapes from that vineyard with respect, then we don't really, there's a lot of things you can put into a wine.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that are perfectly legal to do to a wine and to add to a wine, and our goal is to not use any of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if we have a vision for that wine and we're trying to achieve a stylistic goal, and your first big decision as a winemaker is when to pick that fruit, if you make that decision correctly and you treat that fruit with respect and you just kind of gently guide it along its path, you can create some gorgeous wines without having to do a whole lot.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of our goal with everything that we do.
That's what I love about you as well. I mean, I love how nerdy you get and detailed and how curious you are all the time. And like it goes down even like to the aging vessels that you have here too. Because you don't just use barrels. You have concrete.
Barrels are boring.
Barrels are boring. Boring ass barrels with their bung holes.
Yeah. Bung pod.
The bung pod. So you have concrete eggs. You have. Can you explain what a drunken turtle is? Because you have that as well.
Yeah. So we have 6 kind of what I would say non-traditional winery tanks that we use here on the regular. We have 2 Italian amphoras that came from Piedmonte. So we imported them over from Italy. And they are a blend that the Italians call coccia pesto. And it's a tank that is made out of terracotta and Italian marble. And Opus, which is the company that makes them, Opus calls them drunk turtles. Okay. And I don't know why they call it a drunken turtle, but it's almost like an upside down egg where the skinny end is on the bottom and the kind of the wider end is on the top. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe they thought it maybe looks like a turtle, like upside down, like struggling, like, you know, like on its half shell or whatever. And actually there's a cool plaque on the front of the tanks that shows like a tipsy turtle that's upside down.
That's cool. Like that, the structure of it, like what it's made out of, it sounds like a fucking wine cathedral. Like walking into like it's Italian marble and you know,
they're very pretty tanks. They're kind of a pinkish color because of the terracotta. Mm-hmm. But when the vessels are empty and you open the door to the vessel, you can actually see the chunks of aggregate and you see the Italian marble in there. And a lot of times folks ask if the tanks are lined with anything, and they're not. In fact, it's one of the cool aspects of the tank is that the wine is actually touching the minerals of what the tank is made out of. So we make Grenache Blanc in those Coccia Pesto amphora, the drunk turtles, and having that Grenache Blanc touching the terracotta and the Italian marble really enhances the minerality of the wine because the wine is touching those minerals the entire time it's in that tank. Yeah. And it just it accentuates the way you perceive the acidity of the wine. So Grenache Blanc is a very acidic wine and can be really, really acid focused. But because of the way the wine ferments in these tanks and the minerals that it's touching and just the convection and fermentation kinetics that are happening inside of this tank, it creates this softness. So even though there's this acid-driven white wine, you get this round texture to it, where if you were to make that same wine in stainless steel, you would experience that wine in a completely different way. Yeah. And so when we were first using these vessels, we were actually experimenting and we were making that Grenache Blanc in the amphora, in a concrete egg, and in stainless steel, so we could compare that same wine picked from the same vineyard on the same day across 3 different vessels. And it was just like mind-boggling how different the wine was perceived based on what tank it was fermented in. Yeah. You know, same yeast strain. Like, I mean, it wasn't like early pick, late pick, whatever. Like, it all came into the winery the same day. It was processed through the same press load. You know, we just diverted the juice to 3 different tanks. Yeah.
So did you do that as an experiment, or is that something that is a regular basis that you split them up like that?
Well, so that was the grand experiment. Was okay. This is the first time we're using this new vessel. We need to have some baselines to compare it against, so we know what this tank does to the wine, and that was our way of experiencing the wine in stainless, which is kind of the way we'd always done it. The wine in concrete, which we had used before, and we tried other versions of Grenache Blanc in concrete. And then what does the terracotta do to it? And how does that make the wine express itself differently? Yeah. And then having all 3 of those to taste against side by side was just awesome, because then as a winemaking team, we were able to sit down and trial all three against each other and decide, for the vision of what we have for our winery, and considering that wine in the lineup against all of the other offerings that we have, like which one is the most unique expression of that variety, and how does it fit in with everything else that we do?
Yeah.
And ultimately, that experiment that year using that new amphora, we actually liked the amphora version the best. And so we bought another one, and now we're exclusively using that Italian amphora in that program.
I love it. It's amazing. And what did you do? So right now we have the Chelan and Papa.
Yeah, so Chelan and Papa is our take on a French Chateauneuf de Pape. It's a big GSM. So it's Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah, Cinsault, and Counoise. So we got 5 of the allowed 13 in one bottle. We use a couple different vineyard sources on this wine. It's about half from Boucher Vineyard, which is down in the Yakima Valley, Grandview, Washington. One of the pioneers of the Washington wine industry, Dick Boucher, planted this vineyard. He started growing grapes in Washington State in the early 80s. They have several hundred acres of wine and juice grapes on their property, and just do an amazing job. Dick and Luann are awesome folks. Luann is one of the sweetest people. Dick's wife, Luann, is one of the sweetest people you'll ever meet. She's like my mom. She's like my vineyard mom. Love her to death.
Vineyard mom, I love that.
And they are nerdy about Rhone varieties just like we are, so they grow some of the more unique varieties in the state, which is really cool. And then another block that we work with is the Meek Vineyard, which is Benton City. It's just outside of the Red Mountain AVA. And we get all same 5 varieties from there: Grenache, Mourvedre, Syrah, Cinsault, and Counoise. And it's a great site, planted on an old cherry orchard. It's called the Meek property because it was planted by a guy named Michael Meek, who I believe still lives in Excelsior, Minnesota, which is a suburb of like Minneapolis.
Oh, okay.
But this Minneapolis guy just loved wine and wanted to plant a premium vineyard in Washington State. And I got to meet him early on, and it was an amazing block to get into, and we absolutely love it. And we used to keep the 2 vineyards separate, but the more we got into blending wines, the more we found we were able to kind of build complexity by taking these 2 different distinct sites and working with the blend ratio to just kind of build different layers of earthiness and spiciness and fruitiness and like make a more interesting wine. And so in 2021, which is the wine we're trying right now, was the first year we did the multi-vineyard blend.
Oh, okay.
And
nice.
I think it's one of the best expressions of Papa that we've made so far.
Yeah, it's beautifully balanced. It has earth, as spice, as fruit components. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, one of the things
kill it with that one.
One of the things we like at Cairdeas is, being a Rhône-inspired winery, pulling our inspiration from the south of France. French wines, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of times have this really earthy, spicy component to them.
I'm glad that you're talking about this because I was like, oh, you should go there with this.
And so Washington wine, in a lot of cases, is like just super fruit driven.
Yeah.
And while that's all fine and good, we're trying to make a Washington wine that's really authentic to where we're pulling our inspiration from. And so we want a real savory component to everything that we do.
Yeah.
And so, again, through growing decisions, through picking decisions, through processing and aging decisions, we're able to create these wines that, yes, have the fruit that Washington is known for, but also are true and have that savory component to where we're pulling our inspiration from, and making wines that have that earthy component, that spicy component that we're looking for.
Yeah. and you do an amazing job. But also, by the way, your Counoise, I was going to call it a sleeper because it's one of my fucking favorite ones, but I feel like it sells out every single time you release it, so it's not a sleeper. I feel like it was your sleeper for like the longest time. But I mean, through your collection of wines that you make, that one is kind of the more with my palate, I'm more kind of like, I don't know, people say French or Burgundy, whatever. I love Pinot Noir. I love lighter style wines, especially reds, which I do have respect for, medium and full bodied as well. But that Counoise is like very Pinot Noir-esque, and it's also got spicy to it, almost has a salinity thing going for it, and also kind of some earthiness. And it's such a balance of like a light style wine, which adds a good amount of diversity to your lineup, but also brings in that complexity, something that I know that you cherish a lot within wines too. And that one is one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, so one of the cool things that we get to do making Rhône-inspired wines is we get to introduce some varieties to folks that they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot of Cinsault, Counoise, Carignan grown in Washington State.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times folks will come here and they're like, Counoise, I've never heard of that before.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Slept
rad. Let me tell you a story about a place on the planet that we pulled this, inspiration for this wine from.
Yeah.
And let me tell you a story about like why we do this and introduce them to something they've never tried before. And I get so excited about that.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Because it's like I get to tell an interesting story to somebody, and I get to help educate somebody about a place that like has been instrumental in who we have become as Cairdeas Winery, and I get to introduce them to something brand new, which is so fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll ever meet somebody in Washington that doesn't know what Merlot is, but I meet people every day that are like, Karen, what? Carignan?
Yeah.
Carignan?
Carignan?
Yeah. And it makes a crazy good, delicious wine. And I love Pinot. I love Burgundy. I love Willamette. And I love Sonoma Coast Pinot. And it's one of those things where you get to know a certain variety, and then you get to know where that variety is from.
Yeah.
And you kind of start to pick up on, well, these are the characteristics of how this grape tastes when it's grown in these conditions. And so, yes, you can have Pinot Noir, but if it's from the Willamette Valley in a cool vintage, it's going to taste like this. If it's from Burgundy in a warm vintage, it's going to taste like this.
Yeah.
And that's going to be drastically different than if it's grown on the Sonoma Coast.
Yeah.
And so it's a really cool thing to learn about wine as well, is like, yes, we have one grape variety, but then we get into like the whole conversation of terroir.
Yeah.
And what is the climate and what's the microclimate of that vineyard, and how does that influence the grapes and the way that turns out. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people about wine, I tell them there's about 3 million decisions that we have to make with each wine that we do. And I mean, that starts with the sites that you pick, the varieties that you pick, the clone of the variety that you pick, how you ferment it, how you age it. I mean, there's so many things that influence the way the wine turns out. And so one of the most important things as winemakers that we have to do is we have to have a vision for the wine.
Yeah.
Because each one of these wines has a personality, and we want the personality of that wine to show through, whether it's a cool vintage or a warm vintage, year over year. I don't want it to taste the same, but I want you to recognize try as try.
Yeah.
If it's a cold year, I want you to taste it and be like, yeah, let's try. If it's a warm year and you taste it, I want you to say, let's try. Yes, one year like has some characteristics, another year like might be a little bit different, but like that one needs to maintain its personality.
Yeah.
And so you can't do that unless you have stylistic goals and a vision for each wine.
Right, and consistency with it too. Which, I mean, consistency is so hard with vintage to vintage stuff, but All right, let's take a quick break for a second because I got something I want to tell you guys about. If you want an extra episode per week, if you want exclusive discounts on some dope-ass merch that we got, also, if you want to add your 2 cents, your opinions, your hot takes, or your topic ideas, we want to hear about it. Go to patreon.com/officialbungpod and talk to us. Now let's get back to the show. All right, guys, we got some news. We have an official Bung Pod store. We got some merch going. bungpod.store. Update your life. Update your wardrobe. You need some new clothes. You need to look fresh. Update your life. Update your style. We got hoodies. We got handbags. We got stickers. We got beanies. We got more coming on the way. So if you like the show and you want to cop yourself some merch, go to bungpod.store. Now let's get back to the show. I'm on the Try right now.
So Try is our kind of our house favorite. I would call it a flagship red wine. It's our GSM. So it's like it's the fan favorite wine.
Yeah, it's beautiful. When I first smelled it, it was a little reductive, which is something for me I just love a little reduction, like in the wines. For some reason, for me, it's like when there's a slight bit of reduction in there, my brain is like, this is attention to detail in winemaking.
Well, and
I don't know why I think that, but I think a lot of the
part of our minimalist approach with our winemaking and our desire to less is more, to do less is more, is that we try to be as hands-off as possible. And so we do very reductive winemaking where, after the wine goes into barrel, it is moved once after the ML conversion is complete, and then it is basically left alone until we blend the wine, which is a year later, which is when it is moved again and blended into a tank, and then is moved one more time when it's bottled. So that's literally 2 movements.
Yeah.
Or 3 if you count the bottling day.
Yeah.
Where big wineries are racking 4 times a year.
Yeah.
So 8 times total. And we're doing 2.
Yeah.
But again, if you refine your processes and that fits your stylistic goal, I mean, we can get away with it.
Yeah.
So we literally, we will press off a wine into barrel and then not touch it again. It's kind of like what we like to do. Again, less is more as far as we're concerned. So, reductive winemaking is something that is not for everybody, but that's at Cairdeas, that's the way we like to do things. And I am not afraid by that, and I absolutely love the way that this wine turns out. This wine has everything that I want. You get the fruitiness from the Syrah, but you get that really savory, earthy component from the Mourvèdre and from the Grenache, and also the Boucher vineyard, which is one of the main vineyard sources for this wine. That vineyard is very pronounced, and I don't care what variety it is.
Like pronounced in what way?
Well, that vineyard is very expressive, and
okay.
You can smell a wine and just know that it's from Boucher. I mean, Cabernet Franc from Boucher, Syrah from Boucher, Tempranillo from Boucher. They all have a distinct aromatic quality to them.
How would
that
you
is specific to
describe
that
it?
vineyard. It has a really savory, aromatic quality to it. There's fruit there, but they also have this really savory kind of aromatic quality to them, which is very unique to this site, which is one of the things that I absolutely love about it. And so by smelling it that it's Cabernet Franc or Tempranillo or Syrah in this case.
Yeah.
But it's Syrah from Boucher versus Syrah from somewhere else in the state.
Yeah. I remember when, by the way, you and your wife Lacey are one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, me moving to Washington State from California, moving back to Washington State from California, especially up here in the Chelan area. And then one of the times when I was visiting you guys, because every time I'd come up here, I'd come over here and visit you guys, taste some wine, hang out, nerd out about wine. And I think it was your first wine that you made from Boucher, and you're just like, your face was just lighting up, and you're just like, dude, I fucking love this vineyard, dude. Like, you're so excited to get it, and now I can see why. And you've been working with them for how many years now?
I think the first year we harvested from Boucher was 2013.
2013?
So it's been 10 years.
Wow, yeah. So it probably wasn't the first time that you got the vineyard. It was, well, I guess it was the bottling, probably.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
We started making, I think it was white wines for the first couple of years. We got some Marsanne and some Grenache Blanc from Boucher, and then another year or two into it, we started getting some Grenache and some Mourvedre, and then some Syrah. Mm-hmm. And it turned into, now we get, I think, 8 different varieties from Boucher, and
nice.
They're one of our bigger vineyard sources. We have probably 3 main sources for fruit, and then, a handful of other vineyards that we get smaller quantities from. Mm-hmm. But Boucher, which is in the Yakima Valley AVA, is just like a Washington classic. Like, they have their growing just super dialed in for where they are. And Dick has this really amazing ability to adapt what he is doing in the vineyard to the conditions for that season. So, like, for instance, we had a vintage a couple years ago where we saw the warmest temperatures during a growing season that we've ever had in Washington State. And the people that were kind of following their standard, this is what we do, they suffered, and canopies were like collapsing early in the season because they weren't watering enough. Oh. Where, like, traditionally it's like you wouldn't put water on a vineyard in June. Yeah. But if you weren't watering your vineyard in June in this particular season, you were screwed.
You're just absolutely fucked.
And so you have to have growers that know their site, and you have to have growers that are willing to adapt based on what's happening in the climate to achieve what your goals are for that season.
Yeah.
And just by driving around, you can see the people that get it and the people that don't, mm-hmm. because when it's August, your canopy shouldn't be brown.
Yeah.
And in that year, there were a lot of brown canopies.
Yeah.
So it was like, ooh.
For those that don't know, canopy is it's the leaves. It's the shoots and the leaves. And if it's brown during the growing season, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of other things that will help you identify if you have a healthy canopy or not, but you don't really know that unless you're walking through the vineyard. And so, it's so important as winemakers to be out in your vineyards and be walking through your rows and to be visually inspecting things like, what do the leaves look like? What do the canes look like? What do the tendrils look like? I mean, all of those things tell you about vine health. Mm-hmm. And if they're getting the nutrients that they need, or they're getting the water that they need. And then visually inspecting clusters, like, what do cluster size look like? What do berry size look like? Mm-hmm. Is the cluster loose, or is the cluster like super compact? Like, I mean, there are varieties, yes, that are supposed to have loose clusters, and there are varieties that are supposed to have compact clusters, but you don't know if something is off unless you're looking at it. Yeah. And if you're only visiting the vineyard late season and something is off, it's too late to change it at that
Yeah.
point. And so one of our responsibilities as good stewards of making the wine that we want to make is to constantly be checking in and making adjustments well throughout the season. And that starts from as soon as the vines start to grow and all the way through. And so I don't know how some people can only start making vineyard visits like in August because it's like you're missing the mark at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go on to the consonants. So we had the papa, we had the try. This is the consonants. And so this is Petit Syrah
Petit Syrah and Syrah.
and Syrah. So why do you add the Syrah in there with the Petit?
Well, Petit Syrah by itself is maybe a little more aggressive than we want. That and at Cairdeas, we focus on blended wines. We don't make a lot of varietal wines. Not that we're opposed to varietal wines, but we feel like a chef in the kitchen where you can make a more interesting and unique dish by building flavors through different techniques, different barrel types, different fermentation types, blending different varieties together, or if you're a chef, blending different spices together, to just build a wine that has more character and is more complex and more unique and is distinctly Cairdeas.
Yeah.
I mean, Petit Syrah can largely be Petit Syrah. It might be expressive of its vineyard, but if it's Petit Syrah from this vineyard, it tastes like Petit Syrah from that vineyard, where we can pick Petit Syrah from that vineyard and ferment it in a couple different vessels and age it a couple different ways and blend it with a couple different things. And now all of a sudden we've taken Petit Syrah from that vineyard and we've made it something that's ours.
Yeah.
It's representative of who we are as a winery, and it's representative of what our vision is for the wines that we're trying to make.
So this is inky, staining in the glass, and the Petit Syrah, almost like it's very purple. Can't see through it. Looks black when you try and see through it. So there's a lot of people listening, so try and describe what I see as much as I can. How much whole cluster do you guys do?
So on this wine, we don't do any. There are a few wines that we make that we do upwards of 50% whole cluster. It's kind of our highest percentage. We, in 2023, just started doing some foot stomp whole cluster wines. We did some Counoise and some Syrah. And those are really fun experiments that I'm anxious to kind of see how they evolve and what they become. Our concrete Syrah that we make is the one wine that we do that's in our regular lineup where it's 50% whole cluster. And when I say whole cluster, I mean unadulterated whole cluster.
So you're not like de-stemming and throwing stems back in?
The fruit literally comes into the winery and we dump it into a tank. There's no foot stomping.
Yeah.
There's no adding stems back. It's literally pick bins go right into the tank.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when people say whole cluster, they bring in whole cluster and then they foot stomp it to release juice.
Right.
Or they de-stem it and they add stems back to have some stem inclusion. Ours is whole fruit, berries attached to the rachis, and that creates a couple of different things, right?
The rachis.
You get some carbonic macerations happening where the berry is still attached to the stem, but yeast is able to make it through the cell wall of the grape, and fermentation starts inside of the fruit. So the berry is literally fermenting inside of itself, which accentuates the fruit to like a massive extent. And then you have the stem inclusion, and so you're getting this tannic extraction from a source that isn't there if you destem the fruit altogether, right? And so you're getting that enhanced fruitiness, but a different type of tannin inclusion in the wine, and just creates a really unique wine. And then for that particular wine, our concrete Syrah, we ferment it and age it solely in non-blow concrete tanks. And so it has never seen an oak barrel, and you're creating this really interesting Syrah that has stems, that has whole cluster, that has never been in oak barrels, and it's just a really cool expression of what Washington Syrah can be. And if you tasted this wine, it doesn't need a barrel.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times people use barrels for aromatics, or they use barrels for texture, or they use barrels for body, and this wine has
Or
all of
fuck
those
ups.
things without well, so I mean, like early on, like I don't even remember who told me this, but I was talking to a winemaker that I really respected, and he was like, dude, using new barrels is like putting ketchup on things. It's like, you know, you don't go to a restaurant and order this crazy, expensive, delicious filet mignon and then put ketchup on top of it.
Yeah.
That like F's up like everything that the grower did to grow a great piece of beef and everything that the chef did to cook a great piece of meat.
Yeah.
You know, if you were to put ketchup on it, you're like introducing flavors that shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
And so using new oak is very much using ketchup in a lot of ways. And
That's
so,
why I don't like most Napa cabs.
right.
Because it's just like, oh, cool. Like you're using expensive oak.
We would
That's all I can
literally
smell.
go to wineries and taste their Merlot and taste their Cabernet Franc and taste their Malbec and taste their Cabernet Sauvignon. And I'm like, I can't tell you which one is which because they all taste like brand new barrels.
Yep. I hate that.
And so it's like you lose, in a way, you lose varietal like typicity because the vessel you age that wine in has dominated the aromatic and the flavor profile.
Yeah.
And so at Cairdeas, we are very anti new barrel because we want the vineyard sources to shine through in the wines. We want the winemaking techniques to shine through in the wines. We want the varietal to be the forefront of what you smell and you taste. And so, you know, the caramel and the vanilla and the smokiness or the spiciness that you get from all these barrel tannins, like those are things that we might use to accent the wine in small amounts. But again, like if we go back to like the fundamentals of what we've been talking about and what we are, who we are, less is more.
Yeah.
And so it's like you might add a pinch of salt to a dish to bring out a flavor. But if you are just tasting salt, you have overdone it.
Yeah.
And like,
1000%.
to me, it's like that dish is ruined at that point.
Yeah.
It's like we've all had the salty dish at the restaurant. It's like that chef had way too heavy of a hand.
Yeah.
That's not what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
We're trying to respect the ingredients that we're using and have those be what you smell and taste. That's what we want.
Yeah. I think you've represented your brand really well. This is a longer episode. It's like almost an hour, which is double what we usually do. But hey, the conversation and what you're saying is like, you know, more of that is not a bad thing. You know, it's not like salt or French oak.
In this case, more is more instead of less is more.
Yeah, more is more in this case.
Sorry, I've dominated your time, Ian. But
hey, don't apologize for giving me something good.
I love talking wine nerd with a wine nerd.
Dude,
so.
I love it too. So tell people where they can find you guys.
Well, they can find us in the small town of Manson, Washington, on the north shore of Lake Chelan. We have this gorgeous brown barn with a copper roof.
Can't miss
in
it.
one of the most beautiful settings on the whole earth. Lake Chelan is gorgeous. That's why we decided to live here. It's the biggest lake in Washington State at the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. It's absolutely gorgeous. We have 300 days of sunshine, which is why I want to live here. It's awesome. Cairdeas is a crazy Irish word, and so it's ridiculous to try to spell, but it's Cairdeas, Cairdeas Winery. Google will help you with the spelling if you fuck it up.
SEO.
Yeah, you gotta love it, but you can Google us.
Google.
Yeah, CairdeasWinery.com. We're on the Facebook. We're on the Instagram.
Cairdeas Winery on Insta as well.
Yep, and
Cool.
yep, you can find us in all the places.
Also, click the link in the description because they'll have their website and their Instagram handle and everything in the description of this video as well. So go there, buy some wine, join the wine club. Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate your time, man. Cheers
Dude.